Seattle have sent emails to the Seattle City Council Democrats.
I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati.
All right. Welcome to Sab's podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. My special guest tonight is Kshama Sawant. She is a city council member of Seattle. And earlier this year, Kshama Sawant announced that she would not be seeking re-election and instead working on a new endeavor, which is called Workers Strike Back, in an effort to help unionize workers. Welcome back, Kshama.
So nice to be here. Thank you for having me, Sabby.
All right. So Kshama, I know that you actually started a podcast called On Strike, and I want to go ahead and bring that up on the screen here because I like what you guys are doing over there. And this is you and Bia. And I really like this because I feel like now we actually do have a platform that is focused on covering these labor actions that are happening all across the country.
Yeah, that's very important. And at the same time, I want to also share with your viewers that we obviously we are covering workers who are on strike, and it has been an incredible period actually of a resurgence of the strike action. But at the same time, I want to make sure your viewers know it's not only about strike actions. For example, the episode that we released this week, actually just yesterday, is about the Israel-Palestine conflict, and I hope the people who are watching this will check it out because we have an analysis that, as you know yourself, Sabrina, from being a left podcaster, that it's very hard to find this kind of analysis, and it's basically non-existent in the mainstream corporate media. So hopefully it's going to be useful for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great. One of the things I noticed, you also are doing interviews on this podcast as well.
Yeah, we're trying very hard to bring in the voice of ordinary people and of people who are playing a leadership role in various struggles. And I don't mean the many of the union bureaucrats who are actually maybe not playing a good role and maybe even holding struggle back, but I mean rank and file worker leaders. So for example, one episode that we did recently, which was really quite inspiring, and I felt myself inspired by talking to the worker leaders, is one, they're both local struggles, but they're both very important. One is the workers at local Pacific Northwest chain of organic grocery stores called PCC, and they're all members of UFCW 3000, which is the biggest union local in Washington state. And these rank and file workers are trying to lead a left caucus inside the union because they can see that leadership is really missing. And then across the coast in New Jersey, nurses at the Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital have been on a courageous strike for several weeks now, and they this is not only rank and file leaders, but also the elected leadership of the union is playing a very important role in the leadership of this strike action. But it's important to see that these may be localized strike actions, but they're very important because it shows all that is stacked up against workers and what workers need to do to overcome those obstacles.
Well said. And I also saw that you had an interview with Dr. Cornel West, and he talked about his campaign. And I know that Cornel West has also been on the ground for some of these strikes that have been happening across the country. One of the things that I think was really interesting to me, and I talked about this last night as well, was the issue with Peter Dow. So I interviewed Peter Dow about the concerns that people had in reference to him joining that campaign. And there was something that you said at the end of that interview that I think it really made a lot of sense, is that why would you add someone who basically very shortly is coming from the Democratic Party, just came from a Democrat campaign, even though Peter has moved further left in his political ideology. He just came from Marianne Williamson's campaign, which was a part of the Democratic Party. And in a sense, it almost seems like, why take that risk? And I don't know if you've heard the news, but it was announced the other day that Peter Dow has now resigned from that campaign. And now a lot of people are starting to feel, hopeless again, because they're like, what has happened now? And I think that there's been a lot of things that have happened, in particular with that campaign. But the moment it was announced that Peter Dow was resigning, some people have made the comment that, well, he's done his job, he's ruined the campaign. I want to get your perspective about that.
I think it's important to look at overall the trajectory of the campaign. And I think that is what is worrying to some people who are watching this, at close quarters. And I want to, respond to that and then zoom out and talk about what this campaign could mean to ordinary people who are not watching every political development closely, but overall do care about what options are available and where there is a real possibility for building a struggle. So in terms of the people who are watching the campaign closely, I think it's understandable for a lot of people to feel like it's going from one thing to another that's probably not going well. We disagree. I mean, Socialist Alternative and we disagree about, and we've said this publicly, about the decision to leave the Green Party, and whatever the differences might be, and we have disagreements with the Green Party too. It's not so much about that, but it's about ballot access. I know you said that, other podcasts have said that as well, on the left. And I think that was a quite big question that emerged to us. Now, I don't know if that was Cornel West's decision or Peter Dow's decision. At the end of the day, of course, it goes to Cornel West because he's the candidate, and it's not like they have a political organization as we do in Socialist Alternative, where the elected leadership of Socialist Alternative together makes decisions with membership approval. We have membership voting on every major decision that needs to be taken after discussion and debate. So we have that genuinely democratic process. I don't believe that that's nothing like that, that anything like that exists on that campaign. So I don't know which individuals were involved, but regardless of who was responsible for that decision, it just didn't make sense to us that they would let go of the ballot access that was available. Because, at the end of the day, it's not so much about this question as to what role can a left campaign play in the presidential election year does not actually stop at, is Cornel West a genuine person with genuine ideals and integrity? I think the answer to all of those questions is yes. I mean, I genuinely believe that he has has moral and political integrity and wants to use his potential for the good. But I don't think that's how, or that's like a limited way of framing the question. Really, the question is, how can a campaign, or a left campaign that is supposed to be challenging the Democratic and Republican candidates, be an alternative to the Biden-Trump agenda? And the answer to that question has to also depend on whether you're concretely on the ballot on state after state after state, because that is what makes you a concrete threat to the Biden re-election campaign, to the Democratic Party apparatus. So if you're in the you say good things in the abstract, it's not at all the same thing as actually becoming a threat to Biden. And that is where we saw Bernie Sanders fail. He of course ran a very strong campaign, on demands. It electrified people, especially in 2016. We saw tens of millions of ordinary people, including in the so-called deep south, which there's a temptation for the left to just forget that there are just masses of working people there who will agree with us on working class demands. And Bernie Sanders' campaign brought that forward. But at the end of the day, when he was pushed out of the Democratic primary, he decided to just drop out, not run as an independent. And then On top of all that, he shamefully, unfortunately, also endorsed the Democratic candidate, whether it was Clinton or Biden. So that was the problem, not running till the very end, which is what makes you a threat to the Democratic establishment. So when that component is missing, I think strategically it really weakens the campaign. And as far as Peter Dow's decision, I mean, his decision to resign is concerned, that just makes me concerned about the status of the campaign itself. We need a strong campaign. I mean, think about it, right? You have the Ukraine war, you have now this brutality being unleashed by the Israeli state and their military against the people of Gaza and the occupied West Bank, but obviously with both the political support and the enormous military funding from US capitalism, from US imperialism. Imagine the value of having one left anti-war candidate, which Cornel West has. I mean, he has spoken very clearly against the wars, but imagine the value of that. And if we had a strong campaign running, that would make a huge difference.
I agree. And you mentioned something about Bernie Sanders choosing not to make that decision to, move away from the Democratic Party. I really do think back to 2016, and I realize if Bernie Sanders would have responded to the Draft Bernie campaign. Now, there's issues with the People's Party. Obviously, they don't have ballot access either. But let's say it wasn't the People's Party. Let's say it was just someone else that said, Bernie, we want you to start the third party movement. If that would have happened back in 2016, think about where we would be today in reference to a third party movement. So that's the thing. Like, I think people are like, well, you can't just change the system overnight. No, you can't. But that was a couple of years ago. But I think we would be further along now if Bernie Sanders would have made that decision.
Yeah, exactly. And what we were saying also was, obviously that is the first step, to run all the way as an independent and be a real pole of attraction for ordinary people who are fed up with Biden, and obviously also understand that the Republican Party and especially the Trump agenda represents a real danger to US society. And then so not doing that is a problem. But what we were saying was not only just doing that, but using that as a platform for launching a political organization that can have a life outside of the presidential election year. So I totally agree with you, Sabrina, that if not only had he run all the way, but had he helped launch a nationwide organization or movement like that, that could have provided a real platform to then build on. And then, we would have had a real momentum. We could have had a real momentum around that. One thing to add, though, in terms of the Cornel West campaign is that even now, even with all the deficiencies that we have seen, the reality is that if you talk to ordinary people, not people who are just politically tuned to every development, but who understand that their lives are on the line, that contrary to the message of Bidenomics, their lives are not getting better, their lives have gotten worse, with the COVID programs being withdrawn, with student debt payments being now back on the agenda, since October, people, since this month, people have to pay those payments again every month. With all of that, I think people understand, you don't have to be a politically savvy person to understand that, yeah, there is a real value to having a left campaign. And so people who haven't heard about Peter Dow or Cornel West's decision about the Green Party, they are still very excited about the Cornel West campaign. They are excited about having somebody and a real platform to talk about Medicare for all, to talk about a $25 an hour minimum wage, have an anti-war message. And so I mean, my message would be to the Cornel West campaign is that even now it is really, really important for the campaign, I would say, to have a serious strategy team, strategy sort of organization to be brought together. And I've suggested that to Cornel West himself, and also when Peter Dow was the manager, I suggested that to him as well, that we should have a real strategy team so that we can really help the campaign run in a very effective way. So just if you look at just what ordinary people are thinking, there is real desire to have a real left campaign.
That's right. So one question I do have about running as an independent, because someone was asking me this question the other day. The difference, I think, if you are running in the Green Party, if you lose, you still have that energy with the Green. So it's like you brought people over to the Green Party who may have otherwise never joined the Green Party, if that makes sense. So you can continue fighting some of those efforts through the Green Party, even during, the off season when it's not election season. But now running as an independent, and this is the question I keep asking people, if you're running as an independent and you don't win, where does all that energy go afterwards? And I think that is something that does worry me, because I saw that happen to Bernie Sanders. All this energy went into the Bernie campaign. And when Bernie suspended his campaigns, the energy it had nowhere else to go. So a lot of people just basically, folded their hand and said, okay, I'm just going to vote for the corporate Democrat. So in this particular situation with Cornel West running as an independent, where is all that energy going to go if Dr. West doesn't win?
Well, but just to be clear, in terms of reality, we don't expect him to win, as in we don't expect that a left campaign can win the presidency right now. That's not on the cards. And if that were, it would be, if that had been the case, it would be on the back of a major unprecedented mass movement and upheaval in the nation, because you can't just have somebody who's genuinely anti-corporate, anti-capitalist elected at the presidential level without that kind of uprising actually already in the making. It's not, you can't just do that automatically. So I think we have to be, just in terms of having a reality check, we're not going to we weren't talking about him winning, but what we were talking about is extremely important, which is exactly the points that you and I were making just now, which is that using the campaign as a vehicle to, first of all, really change the dynamic in the presidential election year. Put the Biden and the Trump campaigns on notice that using that as a vehicle to expose the hollowness, first of all, of Bidenomics. Really, ordinary people, go and look at how tens of millions of Americans are living. They're suffering right now. And not to mention the blood that Biden has on his hands with the support for the Ukraine war and the Israel attack on Palestine. And let's be clear, all of this is happening in the context of the new Cold War. In other words, the war in Ukraine is not about self-determination, as Biden claims. His whole idea of democracy versus autocracy is now in tatters. It's very visible. How can you say that you're supporting Ukraine in the name of self-determination, and then here you are funding this bloodshed in Gaza and the occupied West Bank with billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars of US money? So what does that indicate about the complete hypocrisy of this idea? So, in other words, what's happening in Israel and the US capitalist class's support for that exposes that all of this is happening in the context of the new Cold War. And so having a campaign that is exposing all these realities and energizing working people to fight for something concrete, and obviously being anti-war is one thing, but as I said, it's also about putting forward $25 an hour, Medicare for all, supporting the union drives, talking about the haves and have-nots. How is it that in this moment you have poverty increasing in the richest country in the world, and then you have a corporation like Amazon that has just posted unprecedented profits? And then you look at the difference between CEO salary and ordinary worker salary. Again, that's unprecedented. So if you look at all these issues that are burning issues for people's lives, it really would make a difference. But as far as what in terms of the party that you're talking about, the third party or a party for working class, I mean, I just have to be honest. Like, I don't believe that the Green Party is going to be that vehicle, because so far what we have seen over the decades is that it's important that the Green Party has developed the ballot access, and I think it is also really, it was really positive, and we welcome this decision. It was really positive when the Green Party leaders embraced Cornel West's candidacy and said, yes, you should run for Green Party candidacy. In fact, all of that unfolded at the worker strike back launch in New York City, as you know, and you covered that at that time. So all of that is important, but I think that we need a new party for working people, because we need what the kind of party we're talking about is not something that emerges just in the presidential election year and runs electoral campaigns. We're talking about a party which has real life in the experiences of the working class of America, which is based in the working class struggle that is happening, and as part of that struggle, builds a membership, working class membership that can run its own candidate on a program that is voted on by the entire membership, that's discussed, debated, and voted on by the membership. So we're talking about a really dynamic organization that is needed. Obviously, it's not going to happen on day one, which is why such campaigns are important. So on the one hand, we don't believe that this is about winning, as in actually winning the presidential election, but because that's not on the cards. But what is possible and what needs to be done urgently is to build a campaign, use the presidential election year to build a campaign that could actually put forward the beginnings of what we need, which is a new party for the working class. And that would require mass rallies. That was one of the questions I asked Cornel West, is how come you haven't done organized mass rallies yet? Because by October of 2015, in that year, heading into 2016, Bernie Sanders had already attracted 100,000 people at his mass rallies, and more people than that already knew the program he was running on. So I think that's the kind of vision we have to put forward, and there is real opening for that. I mean, look at the civil war and crisis inside the Republican Party, right? Look at the abysmal poll numbers for support for the Democratic Party, for Biden, for Democrats themselves. Look at the numbers. The majority Democrats are saying we don't want to send money, military aid to Israel to attack the people on Palestine. I mean, these are incredible. This is an incredible glimpse into the consciousness of the working class in America. In other words, there is a huge opening to do all of that, but we don't, we don't know if that potential is going to be realized. And I have to say, I don't think it was a good idea for Cornel West to, I mean, in my view, make all kinds of blunders. And one is, uh, rather than organize the first mass rally, I mean, let's be clear, they have not organized one mass rally to date. And when I say mass, I mean a rally that is meant for working people, not $1,000 a plate dinner, which was one of the events they organized. They got a lot of pushback, and then they were forced to change the character of the event, but only marginally. At the end of the day, it was not what I would call a mass rally. A fancy fundraiser is not what we're talking about. Remember, Bernie Sanders ran his campaign, raised millions of dollars through taking small donations from ordinary people, and that's how we have raised money as well. We are leaving City Hall this year with having won 4 elections, never being defeated, despite all the corporate money and all the Democratic Party establishment opposition against us. And why did we do that? Was because we really focused on the concrete demands that we could help fight to win, which we have a long track record of. But in the campaigns themselves, we ran them in similar to Bernie, and in fact we started before Bernie, where we were very clear. Our support lies in the grassroots. And the other thing I should mention, unfortunately, is the billionaire donation that Cornel West took. It was just not okay, and I did not think it was a good idea for him to then try to justify it as well, because it's wrong.
Yeah. I think there's a number of things that could be improved. And for people who are not aware, like, for example, with yourself, Kshama, like I remember the first time I interviewed you, you said you didn't want to be a politician. Like, you were actually selected by your organization. But this is the thing I want people to understand. Let's say Kshama did not win when she ran for City Hall. People would have still had something to go back to, because you're coming from the organization Socialist Alternative, and you guys were already doing the fight on the ground with the workers, like the fight for 15, for Amazon, all those kind of things. People still had something to return to. And I agree in reference to the mass rallies. I'm kind of surprised by that too. We were talking about this the other night on Call-In. People were asking, like, where's the rallies? Because Marianne Williamson is holding rallies, RFK Jr. and with all his craziness, he is holding rallies. And so people are really desperate for that. Like, they want that. They want that type of energy. And I don't understand why that has not happened yet. So I agree with you on that.
Yeah, and if I can just clarify, yeah, I mean, just in terms of winning and not winning, just to be clear, it's not that we are opposed to winning. Obviously, we want to win. And if you look at the example of Seattle that you mentioned, Sabrina, is that uh, yes, even if we had not won for example, the very first campaign that we won in 2013, and in fact, to be honest with you, when we launched it, we didn't have a prediction that we were going to win. It was a very, very, very long shot. We were basically, that's how the Democrats, and that's how my opponent at the time, they were very visibly condescending and disdainful towards us. They were like, who are you, you young people out of nowhere, some riff-raff organization. That's the outlook they had. But we were able to win because of the absolute the seriousness with which we take any fight. And first of all, we understand that it's a fight. It's a fight against the democratic establishment, against the elite, against the Chamber of Commerce, and that is the basis on which we won. Remember, our flagship demand was $15 an hour, and then we were able to win that demand actually, and it was historic within 6 months of me taking office. So my point being that whenever and wherever there is a real shot to actually win elections and then demonstrate what a working class elected office actually means, absolutely we should do that. But the reason I'm emphasizing the larger project of a new party for the working class and the kind that I described is because look at what's happened with the whole array of DSA electeds around the nation. 150, 200 electeds, and you constantly hear this refrain from a lot of people on the left, like, oh, let's get elected, yeah, okay, yes, I agree, but what are you getting elected, and who is getting elected, and on what basis, and what is their trajectory going to be once they get elected? So how is it that these 150, 200 candidates have been elected, and yet our example in Seattle stands out as a beacon? I mean, when we were first elected, just to share a story, a reporter asked me, in 5 years from now, what would you consider a sign of real success for the movement that you're trying to build? And I would say, I said at that time that if 5 years from now we are still talking about my election and what we did as the thing to hold on to, then it would be an indication that we haven't gone as far as we need to, because there should be many examples of this kind. So here we are, nearly 10 years since that story that I'm relating, and yet even now our example stands out. And why is that? It's because it's a rare example of what actually needs to be done when you win office, and also the basis on which you win elected office. And the bedrock of all of that is having our organization Socialist Alternative. And so I'm just translating that to a bigger sphere and saying that, extrapolating that, what we need is a new party for the working class of that kind. Obviously, it won't be Socialist Alternative. We would like to be a part of that new party.
I want to pivot just a second to what's happening in reference to Israel and Palestine. I want to go to some of the protests for people who are not aware. Right now in New York City, there's actually Jewish Voices for Peace. It says Jews calling for a ceasefire now have taken over NYC's Grand Central Station. In the name of Palestinians of Gaza, we say not in our name. And I just want to show this really quick. So if those of you who are in New York City, just FYI, this is happening where you are right now. So obviously, as you can see, Kshama, a lot of people, and I think it really speaks volumes when you have people who are Jewish come out and protest in support of the Palestinian struggle. But it's not even just, Jewish Voices for Peace. Also, a lot of students have been hitting the streets protesting. I covered 2 of the protests that happened here in Boston. This was organized by young people. Like, a lot of the younger people are putting all this together, but it's not even just happening in the United States. It's also across the world. And I want to get your perspective about this, because I noticed once the protests started to really increase globally, I noticed mainstream media, all of a sudden, it's like they got that push to have to talk about what happened to the Palestinian people, meaning going all the way back to the history 75 years ago, which they were not talking about initially. Initially, they were talking about the attack that was on the state of Israel and just kind of referring to Hamas as all of the Palestinian people, which is obviously not the case. Do you think like these mass protests that have been happening globally are having an impact on the narrative somewhat, so to speak?
There's no doubt, absolutely, these mass protests are crucial. They are part of the backbone of why you're seeing a real pressure on corporate media. As you said, they all of a sudden I mean, I think overall, I would say they are still, the narrative is still one that dehumanizes the Palestinian people. But you're absolutely right that there has been a shift. They've been forced to make that shift because in response to these protests, and we're seeing that more and more people are coming out in protest. And it's very clear that if the invasion, I mean, if the ground invasion happens and if there is real escalation, and I feel like already, of course, the bloodshed is unspeakable, but even compared to that, if that were escalated by the Israeli military, it is clear that there will be a huge increase in the protests. And so the fact that we are having that kind of outcry in the United States, and for the most part led by just young people, there were walkouts here in Seattle as well, in multiple schools, including the University of Washington. And young people are saying that we don't want this bloodshed, and we want the US military funding to Israel to be ended. So I think there is the pressure from the protests. And if you look at it from the standpoint of the Biden regime and the interest of US imperialism, they for them it has been crucial to try and keep public opinion pro Israel. And I think that we also on the left have to be sober that I think the majority is still pro Israel in the US if you look at the polls. But there is a real break from what you saw in the past, in the sense that young people are much less inclined to be supportive of the Israeli attacks against Gaza than in the past. So there is a shift there as well. So we have to be both sober and also draw hope from the changes that we have seen over the years. But as far as the Biden regime is concerned, where this is, as I said before, it's happening in the context of the new Cold War, where every war or every development for them is like a consideration of a chess move, because they are every side, both the Putin and Xi Jinping side, the China and Russia side, the bloc, and the US bloc, they're both just as cynical. I mean, they represent different sections of the ruling classes under capitalism and imperialism. Neither of them has any interest in saving the lives of ordinary people, whether it is um, ordinary Israelis who were killed by the Hamas attack, or the much more disproportionate attack on Palestinians. They don't care about ordinary people on any side. They don't care about ordinary Ukrainians or ordinary Russians. So that's why it's so important for working people to build an international anti-war movement on a working class basis. But as far as the Biden regime is concerned, none of these protests are helping, because it is pushing against what he wants, what US imperialism wants, which is a carte blanche for carte blanche support for Israel. And I think that also has a lot to do with why the ground invasion hasn't happened yet, because I think it's not exactly in their interest, in terms of their geopolitical and strategic interest in the Cold War, to have that happen. They're already dealing with a war on the Ukraine front, so they're nervous about having to deal with war on two fronts, because they understand, as we do, that this is, if that war escalates, it's not just going to be Israel and then Palestinians dealing with it. It's going to be a regional war, very likely. Already there have been skirmishes with Israeli rockets going and hitting Hezbollah sites in Lebanon. There have been attacks against the airports in Aleppo and Damascus in Syria. And then there's Iran. So it's a very sensitive situation.
I agreed. Another thing I've noticed too, Barack Obama recently made a statement, which I'm still kind of shocked by this. Of course, he said the usual phrase that Israel has a right to exist. But another thing that he said in his statement is that there needs to be some type of solution to, what the Israeli people want and what the Palestinian people want. And then he went on to say that there needs to be a goal towards self-determination for the Palestinian people. And I was very shocked that he said that. And I have to wonder, is it because of the protests that kind of makes people have to acknowledge like the history and what has happened to the Palestinian people? I don't know what else it could be, to be honest, but I was surprised that he said that.
I think a lot of what I was actually just referring to, I think applies to Obama as well. I mean, as you said, let's be clear. This is Barack Obama. We're talking about the deporter in chief here. So let's be clear. And this was his presidency was also part of the whole continuation of the war on Afghanistan. And remember, he ran his first campaign with the promise that he was not going to do a troop search in Afghanistan. And what did he do as one of his first actions? He did a troop search in Afghanistan. So you're talking about we're talking about a succession of warmongering presidents across the Democratic and Republican parties, because whatever their differences may be, ultimately they are both parties of US imperialism, and continuing war has been part of that agenda. So in that sense, I don't really put much truck by what Obama is saying, but I think what, in order to explain why he's saying that, one is that for the ruling class, American ruling class, I think they, as I said before, they have their own reasons to be nervous, and it's not because they care about the blood that is being spilled of ordinary people, especially poor and working class people. It's because they are worried about the price they're going to have to pay in terms of their reputation, because if their main agenda, which it is to beef up support for their bloc against the China-Russia bloc, then this kind of event, where it's clear that this is mighty Israeli military is just bombarding the hell out of ordinary people in Palestine, in Gaza, and in the occupied West Bank, where people are just being decimated.
Mhm.
And just the death count of children is enough to send absolute chills down your spine. And so in that context, the whole idea of getting support from the global south, from neocolonial countries, is really very, very difficult for US imperialism. So that's what they're trying to contain. They're trying to contain that damage. And as I said, that is part of why they as I said, they don't care about ordinary people, but from their agenda standpoint, it was important that they slowed down the potential for ground invasion, because it seemed like it was going to be imminent, but then it has slowed down. And so I think getting Obama to speak about this is part of that agenda, sort of doing a little bit of both sides kind of thing to calm things down a little bit, just so that they can keep it manageable. And if you look at the actual words that he has used, for example, he said that ignoring the human cost of war could ultimately backfire.
Yep.
So those were his words. So in other words, what he's saying, if you read between the lines, it's not so much that he's dripping with compassion for people who are losing their families. It's more that, well, it could backfire against the US imperialism.
That's very, very well put. I think another thing that's been interesting too about all of this is that I just saw a poll earlier this morning that said that Joe Biden is down 11 points among Democrats, 11 points in 1 month. And we all know what started this month, right? So we're going back to October 7th. And so this issue with Israel and Palestine, which a lot of people told us, those of us over at RBN, that this is not an important issue. They've been telling us this for years, by the way. They said most Americans don't care about this. This is not an important issue. It turns out it actually is an important issue. So it's just...
Yeah, exactly.
But 11 points in 1 month is very telling. And I think it's
dramatic. It's dramatic. Yeah.
So I'm curious to see what you think about. What do you think about in reference to the presidential election for 2024? everybody else is kind of, decided to run outside of the two-party system. So like RFK Jr. was running through the Democratic Party, and then he realized they were trying to change the rules on him and Marianne and decided to run as an independent. But except for Marianne is still running in the Democratic Party. I don't see the value in it just because of the fact that there are no debates. Like we all know the Democratic Party isn't going to have debates with Joe Biden. And I thought about the fact if Marianne were to change her mind, I don't think she's going to, but change her mind and run as an independent, then you would have three well-known people, Marianne Williamson, RFK Jr., and Cornel West, running outside the duopoly. And I do feel like that will take some of the attention away from Joe Biden and more focus on, there's other options out there. And I wanted to hear your perspective about that.
I think that if it's clear that RFK Jr. understood that he would get much bigger, he would be able to have a much bigger impact outside of the Democratic Party. And in fact, if you look at the recent poll numbers, it is actually a pity that the Cornel West campaign isn't really hitting their stride, because you can see RFK polling at double-digit numbers, and Cornel West, I think, has dipped since his last high of 7% or whatever. And so it really shows you the opening for independent candidates, that the amount of gain that RFK has made by running independent. In fact, if you look at the super PAC that's pulling for him, I think the statistics are that they were able to raise millions of dollars. I can't remember exactly how much, but I think $11 million or something insane like that within the first 6 hours of him declaring that he's running independent. So that's the kind of opening there is for candidates running independent. We have to be clear. However, we have to be very, very clear on the left. We can't have illusions on someone like RFK. Look at his position on the war from Israel against Palestinians. It is an unspeakable position that there is no way to make any kind of peace or conciliation with that position. And then furthermore, it's not like he's running a very, very clear pro working class campaign, but he has an unfortunate position on this issue. It's not like that. It's, and if you look at the polls again, and what electoral analysts are pointing towards, what they're saying is that it could still go either way. It depends on which way RFK pivots and on what issue, and there's still a long way to go. But at this moment, for the most part, what they are saying is that he is more of a threat to Trump than to Biden, and that should tell us that this is not a campaign for the left. He is really attracting a lot of. He is running not a working class campaign, but he's sort of running a campaign that is attracting people from the right, and that is pretty dangerous. And so we have to be very clear about the nature of his campaign. And as far as Marianne Williamson is concerned, I think that the reason, I don't know, it's not something that I have studied very carefully, but because I don't think it is worth it. I don't think it's a serious campaign, but I think that the reason she has not moved is probably because she's getting what she wants through just running this campaign. I can't see that she's running in any, as I said, in any serious way. So it wouldn't make sense for her to make a shift to independent, because when you shift to an independent campaign, like RFK, for example, your goal is that it's going to be a credible campaign. And by credible, I want to be clear. What I mean is not a campaign that I support, but in terms of how seriously and professionally you're running, that is going to make a difference. And so, and you can see, I actually, there are other other fundraising numbers as well. In addition to the $11 million that his PAC raised within 6 hours of going independent, he's also, I think since then, very soon after that, raised $9 million. The campaign itself raised $9 million, I'm sure. And this was days ago. So now it has probably gone much farther. So if you compare that to the Cornel West campaign, I don't think that those Colonel Bush campaign's numbers at this moment anyway, fundraising numbers would rise to that. So I think, yeah, I mean, overall, just my political opinion is it's really unfortunate that the West campaign hasn't made that kind of strides that RFK has. And as I said, it's going to be very confusing for a lot of young people potentially, because RFK might appear as something that I mean, a lot of young people want to see an anti-establishment candidate, but if you don't have a clearly left anti-establishment candidate, that can point in a very bad direction.
Right. All right, Kshama, I have one more question for you. This is in reference to workers strike back. So there was an announcement recently from Nina Turner. I'm not sure if you saw this, but the announcement was launching another like workers organization called this one, We Are Somebody. And I remember like just playing the announcement video on here and just thinking to myself, like, don't we already have that with workers strike back? And so viewers had questions. And one of the questions was, in the beginning with workers strike back, was there any type of communication from like Nina or any type of interest from her to be involved in workers strike back? Because a lot of us just kind of feel like now, like it doesn't make sense to start a separate worker organization, because now it's like splitting resources.
No, there was no communication. We found out from their social media announcement, just like anyone else found out about it. And I don't think it's a coincidence. I mean, I think that it has been launched because Workers Strike Back has been launched, and Workers Strike Back is actually, I mean, it's still a very small organization, but it is something that's nationwide, which is one of the reasons we decided not to run again for re-election in Seattle, but instead wanted to raise our sights to building something nationally. And it's not so even though it's small, it is still it has made a mark on some of the on the minds of some of the most politically advanced rank and file workers nationwide. And on strike, the broadcast that you mentioned earlier, that's a part of the project of the Workers Strike Back movement. It's not we're not like armchair commentators. We are in the movement. Many of our activists, Workers Strike Back activists, have actually been at the picket lines at UAW, at the nurses strike, and here if the grocery workers. So we are people, we are ordinary working class people who are in the movement, and we are building Workers Strike Back, and we are running the on strike broadcast. And so it is most certainly it's in response to Workers Strike Back. But one thing what I will say is that I mean, yes, if even if it were the case, this is not the case, but I'm just saying hypothetically, even if it were the case that it was some sort of genuine initiative, but it was started as a separate thing from Worker Strike Back, then you're totally right that it would still be bad, because that's splitting resources, and that doesn't help working people. That doesn't help the union movement. We need to be united. If we're doing the same thing, then why have different organizations join ours? So yes, that is true. But what I'm going to say is that it's even worse than that, because it is not even meant to be, oh, let's do the same thing that Workers Strike Back is doing. Let's just split resources because maybe we want credit and we don't want Workers Strike Back to get credit. Even, as I said, even that would be bad enough, because careerism is a toxic factor inside social movements. We shouldn't have that approach. But I'm saying that it's even worse than that, in the sense that it's not like they are trying to do what Workers Strike Back is doing. It's ultimately, I think, meant to be a framework for co-opting workers away from Workers Strike Back, and then sending them towards just raising funds for the Democratic Party. Because if you look at what Nina Turner announced, all they did is announce their fundraising apparatus, and that's connected to Act Blue. So it could not get more Democratic Party embedded, Democratic machinery embedded than that. But aside from that, they haven't really announced any other initiative. It's not like, Workers Strike Back activists have been at the UAW pickets. We've not run into anyone from their organization. It's not like they're actually building the rank and file movement inside the labor movement. It's not like they're doing anything. It's meant to co-opt, and co-opt means it's the death knell. Ultimately, this is what shows that the Democratic Party is a graveyard for social movements. They never actually want to support, or let alone lead, the action that working people need. But what they will do is, when there's a genuine threat like Workers Strike Back, then they will try to co-opt it, not with the interest of running something good, but with the intent of just killing the momentum. And to what extent they succeed, of course, that depends on not just workers strike back and how well we do, but on objective conditions, how much workers are clear about the role, and so on and so forth. So it remains to be seen how things work out. But I'm just talking about my sense of their intention, and it's really sad. I mean, it's unfortunate that that even maybe people who maybe understand the character of that organization have supported it. Like, I saw Sarah Nelson, the president of the Flight Attendants Association, did an ad, promotional ad for them. In fact, it's interesting that in that video she says this organization will help you strike back or help workers, something like that. So I'm like, well, that's exactly what we are. So I really would appeal to leaders in the labor movement to understand that this is actually not the way to go, because it's so insidious that it's the repeat of what has not worked for workers. What has not worked for workers is putting our faith in the Democratic Party machine.
All right. Well said, Kshama. Well, Kshama, before you go, anything you have coming up you want to announce?
Mainly just wanting people to check out our broadcast work on strike, and we will be on the ground, as workers strike back in many different cities, and we'll have announcements as we go.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on, Kshama.
Thank you so much for having me. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, guys. Always a good time to talk to Kshama. Always a wealth of information. And I will say, you guys, I totally apologize. I totally forgot tonight was the World Series. I totally forgot. So I won't try to keep you too long, because I just realized, like, oh my God, it's the World Series tonight. Okay. Anywho, I want to do a quick shout out for patrons, and then we'll go ahead and get into other news stories tonight. So I am so sorry, guys. I can't believe I slept on that one. I'm pretty good about these things. Pretty good. Shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron, guys. Thank you so much for your support. If you're interested in being a Sabby patron, I have 5 categories: Ultimate, Sabinators, Sabsters, and of course, Sabbies. All of their names are listed here. You can also see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen there on the ticker. Thank you guys so much. Shout out, shout out. All right. I really can't believe I forgot about that. All right, let's go ahead and I'll go to some of the super chats, and then we'll go ahead and get into the thumbnail. Thank you for the super chat, Roger. Kshama is that platform on Rockfin, the cooperative. Did you mean it's that platform on the? Yeah, so for those who don't know, Rockfin is a worker co-op. Thank you for the super chat, Wired TARDIS. The fight for free speech should include turning the post office into an internet provider. No one's discussing that strategy. What do you say? That's actually a good idea. I know Andrew Yang had some ideas about other things that you could do with the post office. So I'll hold on to that, Wired TARDIS. Thank you for the super sticker, Aaron. Thank you so much. All right, we'll go ahead and get into the thumbnail here. So let me go ahead and share this. All right, guys. What are we discussing tonight? So Kshama Sawant was just here. We're also going to discuss Richard Wolff debt alert. So we're going to talk a little bit about debt, and there's something I got to show you in reference to analytics of debt, which proves that I was right about something. Not trying to brag, but it proves that I was right about something. So I'm glad I have that data. We're also going to discuss Ice Cube DOJ investigation. I don't know if you've heard about this, but it is concerning. But you're going to hear about it tonight if you have not had a chance to hear about it. But yeah, there is this investigation. We're going to get into all of that. We're also going to discuss Jamal Bowman is charged. So Jamal Bowman is not having a good week. It turns out he was not honest. Imagine that. And last but not least, we'll cover the New York alert. And you see a picture there of Governor Hochul. And that is because there could be something huge coming to the state of New York. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to start with this story about Jamal Bowman, because I don't know if everyone remembers this, but I believe it was a couple weeks ago or so that Jamal Bowman was actually, I guess, somewhat reprimanded for pulling a fire alarm. If you guys remember this whole stunt, and some said that he did this in order to try to delay voting on certain legislation. And Jamal Bowman denied that. In fact, he came out with this statement. This was the first statement that he made when he was accused of purposely pulling that fire alarm. So it was September 30th, and he said, "I want to personally clear up confusion surrounding today's events. Today, as I was rushing to make a vote, I came to a door that is usually open for votes, but today would not open. I'm embarrassed to admit that I activated the fire alarm, mistakenly thinking it would open the door. I regret this and sincerely apologize for any confusion this caused." Now, I said this back then, and I'll say it again. Jamal Bowman was a principal. Jamal Bowman knows what a fire alarm looks like. But some people wanted to give him excuses and say, maybe it just sincerely was an accident. I didn't believe that it was. He went on to say, "But I want to be very clear. This was not me in any way trying to delay any votes. It was the exact opposite. I was trying urgently to get to a vote, which I ultimately did, and joined my colleagues in a bipartisan effort to keep our government open. I also met after the vote with the sergeant at arms and the Capitol Police at their request and explained what had happened. My hope is that no one will make more of this than it was. I am working hard every day, including today, to do my job, to do it well, and deliver to my constituents." So that was the first statement that Jamal Bowman made about that incident. However, new information has been released, particularly new footage that actually debunks Jamal Bowman's statement. So you'll see here, this was shared by Kevin Frey, obtained by at New York One, footage of Representative Bowman pulling the fire alarm in the Cannon office building on September 30th. Bowman pleaded guilty this morning in court to willfully or knowingly give false fire alarm in DC. So, correction, this is that first video. I forgot about that. This is the first video of Jamal Bowman pulling the fire alarm. And then I'm going to show you the new footage. And so these are just the regular cameras, so you can see the time counting down here. So here's Jamal Bowman. Okay, let's just stop here for a second. What did he just do? Let's go back. Watch this just for a second. All right. I feel like we're in an episode of what's the show, guys? The detective show, Law and Order. Here we go. Watch this. All right. Now, it looks like he's pushing on the door, right? Okay. Okay. So you saw that, right? So that was the video that showed, there he is right there. You see this? So he doesn't know what a fire alarm looks like, apparently, right? Interesting, huh? So that was the initial footage there. But now, more has been released. Listen to this. Democrat Representative Jamal Bowman removes warning signs before pulling the fire alarm in a House building last month. So this is the piece I want you to pay attention to. Here he comes. Okay. Remember what we were saying? What was he doing here? Watch this. You see that? Why would he do that? Why would he do that? Let's go back. Let's make sure we're looking at the right thing. All right. So there's signs right here. 1, 2. See the signs? Watch this. See? You can see the sign in his hand. So he removed the sign. Why would he do that? Why would you do that, Jamal? Notice the signs are gone. The signs aren't on the floor. The signs are in his hand. Okay. So, as I'm sure you have imagined, that video was making the rounds. And Jamal Bowman has actually officially been charged. They charged him with a misdemeanor because, number one, he lied. And number two, he removed the warning signs. So, of course, you know, Fox News had a field day with this one. So let's go ahead and dive right in and spare me the craziness. Here we go.
Remember Jamal Bowman, the squad congressman who pulled the fire alarm during a vote on a spending bill? Well, Jamal's in trouble. National correspondent Bill Malugion's here with more. Bill.
Yeah, Jesse, and if we remember, Jamal Bowman initially said he pulled the fire alarm on accident while rushing to vote. But local police in D.C., they're not buying it. He has now been charged with falsely pulling that alarm on purpose. Capitol Police released this picture of Bowman pulling the fire alarm in the Cannon office building back on September 30th. Remember, this was as Republicans were trying to start a vote on a spending measure that would keep the government open. At the time, Bowman's spokesperson tried downplaying it, saying Bowman, quote, did not realize he would trigger a building alarm as he was.
Pause here for a second. We'll go back. Does this not say fire to you guys? This clear as day says fire. You know this is a fire alarm. Clear as day, guys. There's no way you could have made that mistake. No freaking way.
Did not realize he would trigger a building alarm as he was rushing to make an urgent vote. And they said the congressman regrets any confusion he made by pulling that alarm with the obvious.
Sorry, let me just go back. I want to show you the signs. So here are the signs. Emergency exit only. Only. These are the signs that he removed. And that was the thing I'm saying. Like, why would you remove the signs?
Regrets any confusion he made by pulling that alarm with the obvious signs there. But Capitol Police say this was no accident. D.C. Superior Court records now show Bowman has been charged with false alarm of fire. Specifically, Bowman, quote, did willfully and knowingly give a false alarm of fire. According to those court records, the charge is a misdemeanor, which carries a maximum of 6 months in jail. Our Fox News team caught up with Bowman at the Capitol today. He says he's already worked out a plea deal.
Can you just explain what that plea agreement is for our viewers?
Well, the statement says it. I mean, pretty much I have to pay a $1,000 fine in 3 months. As long as I stay out of trouble, the case will be dismissed.
And Jesse, Bowman has to surrender himself to D.C. police tomorrow morning for fingerprinting, booking, and arraignment. It's also important to point out that these charges are in D.C. local court, not federal court. That's where the January 6th defendants are being prosecuted, federal court. No word yet, though, on if Bowman is going to face any federal charges for pulling the alarm and interrupting these government proceedings. We'll send it.
So here's my thing. Does Jamal Bowman not realize that there's cameras everywhere? Like in those political buildings in DC? Does he not realize that there's cameras in? So it's like, first of all, you shouldn't have done that in the first place. Second of all, to knowingly just lie, just blatantly lie. Now they did catch up with him. Reporters did. They were talking to him outside. He seems a lot more humble now than he did at first. Oh, man.
As I said from the very beginning, I was not trying to disrupt any congressional proceedings. I'm glad that the investigation yielded that. And so it's against D.C. law, and I got to take responsibility for it, which I'm here to do. And looking forward to just, taking the deal, paying the fine, and in 3 months just being dismissed and continuing my work.
A lot of folks want to know why you didn't tell anybody when you pulled it.
Yeah, I mean, you remember that day, right? It was a lot going on. It was the vote to keep the government open. There was a motion to adjourn. So I was just in a rush, man, trying to get down the street. I was actually running to the Capitol at one point.
That still doesn't explain why you removed the signs. Like we don't want to hear all this. After this took place, he had time to sit down and write a statement. If you had time to sit down and write a statement, you had time to tell people, look, this is what happened. I removed the signs. I did pull. First, you said it was an accident. As we see from the video, it was clearly not an accident. You did it on purpose. You purposely pulled the fire alarm. Then we see that you removed the warning signs from the door. So you don't get to use the excuse of it was a busy day. And so I was just really rushing and trying to get there. You don't get to use that excuse because you took time to sit down and write the statement afterwards. What a mess, man.
So I was just in a hurry and didn't get a chance to do it. And, so that was all my bad.
And what about Republicans who are calling this out and saying,
look,
you had people who came into the Capitol building on January 6th.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, that's crazy. Immediately likening me to an insurrectionist and what happened on January 6th. I mean, this is what they do. They weaponize any opportunity they can. This is what they did in this situation, just so we don't focus on their own dysfunction and destruction of their own party. So this is what they do.
And you're standing.
This is embarrassing, I think. And then also, I want people to understand, for people watching, pulling a fire alarm, like knowingly pulling a fire alarm and there's no fire, that is an offense. Regardless if you're in a government building in DC or if you're at a school or you're just at your workplace and you do that, that is an offense. So like a lot of times you've seen these scenes in like TV shows or movies where someone will just pull the fire alarm just for shits and giggles. Yeah, don't do that. Seriously, just don't. That's a big deal.
By your word that you did not have any intention to slow things. I mean,
Hell
Democrats were trying to stall this vote on the House floor.
Yeah, hell no. I mean, when I ran into the Capitol, I went to go vote, and someone told me go downstairs. There's a meeting, so I didn't even know that meeting was taking place for the motion to I forgot what the vote was, but yeah. So no, absolutely not. Hell no.
Okay, thank you, sir.
All right, thanks, y'all.
Did you guys notice what he said here about what he didn't know? Just pay attention.
And someone told me go downstairs. There's a meeting, so I didn't even know that meeting was taking place.
Someone told me to go downstairs. There's a meeting, but I didn't even know that meeting was taking place. Didn't he say that the reason that he was rushing was to get to that meeting? That's why he was rushing?
For the motion to I forgot what the vote was, but yeah. So no, absolutely not. Hell no.
Okay, thank you, sir.
All right, thanks, y'all. Appreciate it. I hate the confusion that it caused, and I really hate that, Capitol Police and other resources had to be used to respond to this. So I'm really apologetic about that, and I'm going to inform Capitol Police of that. I really hate that part. I'm glad no one was hurt or nothing like that took place. You know what I mean?
You pulled a fire alarm. Like, this is like a big deal. This is a serious thing. Like, you pull a fire alarm and people can trip over people trying to rush and get out and things like that. Like, this is not a joke. This really isn't.
So hopefully, pay the fine. 3 months from now, it'll be dismissed and I'll be able to just continue to serve my district.
You mean it'll be dismissed, like it'll be expunged from your record?
I believe so, yes.
That's the deal?
Yes, yeah.
With Capitol Police?
ACD, the DCAG.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
That's embarrassing, guys. I'm sorry. So the thing is, he has to pay $1,000 fine, which to him, like, for them, that's not a big deal because like they're making good money, like in Congress, even your first year, right? I think their first year, they're already making like $150,000 a year. Like, they make good money. So for him, that's not like this big deal or this big thing or whatever, but it's embarrassing because you were caught in a lie. Like, you lied. Like, you didn't even have to lie. That's the thing. He didn't do that. He didn't stop and think, oh, are there cameras in the, come on, man. You're in a federal building and you don't think there's cameras everywhere you go in DC? There used to be a show that used to come on. I don't know if it comes on anymore. It's like The World's Dumbest Criminals or something like that. The World's Stupidest. Like, that was just stupid. That was just stupid. I'm going to go to some of the comments here. Thank you for the super chat, Quintessential. What does cowbell leftist refer to? LOL. I don't know. Thank you, Janice. He committed the same felony as the January 6 people. The reps should push to have him charged with the same as the people being charged for January 6. That's an interesting point. Thank you for the super chat, Roger. I pulled because door ain't step to me with respect bruh. Roger's funny. Oh man. I told you guys I'm not going to try to keep you too long because I forgot the World Series was on. So let's go ahead and go into our next story. And this is Richard Wolff on debt in America. And I do have a couple of, actually, I think I have one chart. I do have data I want to show you in reference to the debt issue, because I do just want to say something. I think for the past year and a half, we've been talking about debt and income in reference to inflation, recent inflation, and also in reference to the pandemic, right? But the data that I'm going to show you actually shows some of this debt happened before the pandemic. So we're going to get into it. But the name of this video, Richard Wolff, it's called American Families Today Are Crisis Ridden. And he starts off talking about debt. So that's the part that we're going to focus on. And then he kind of shifts into the French Revolution. I think this is really important because he makes the connection about people being in debt and struggling financially, and then what people decided to do in France as a response.
Who suffered some weeks ago the decision by the Supreme Court in this country to block the plan he had developed for a modest partial relief of student debt. We have over 40 million, maybe closer now to 45 million Americans carrying student debt. They've been able to postpone repayment because of the crisis of 2020 and the pandemic. But the plan to give them some real relief was shot down, as I say, by the Supreme Court. And so Mr. Biden, with enormous fanfare of the sort our politicians seem to really like, made a big announcement very recently. And here's what it said. 804,000 students will get relief, and it will be worth $39 billion. Sounds big, right?
Now, hold on to that number, guys. I'm going to put this in the chat because I want you to remember this number. $39 billion. So I'm putting that in the chat, and hold on to that.
804,000, 39 billion. Well, I did the arithmetic just so you understand what Mr. Biden did and didn't do. 804,000, that works out to 1.8% of the student debtors in the United States.
That's the second one. 1.8% of student debtors. This will be important later on. I'll explain why. Just hold on to those numbers.
The other 98.2% get nothing from Mr. Biden in response to the Supreme Court. And the $39 billion, that's 2.2% of what those students owe. Starting now in a few weeks, those students, the vast majority of the 45 million, will start having to pay back between $300 and $400 a month. All
right, let me pause there. He's correct. Because my payments already restarted, and yes, I'm paying between $300 to $400 a month. He's correct about that. So let's just keep it real. But did you hear what he said? 98% of the student debtors didn't even benefit from that plan that Joe Biden had. And this is why a lot of us said, just cancel all of it. And then you don't means test it, of course. That makes things take longer. You have to have more paperwork, yada, yada. Don't do that. Just eliminated all of it, right? When he decided to means test it, there was an income limit. And I told you, even with the income limit, I said, that doesn't make any sense, because basically it's like, as long as you make, I think it was under $125,000 a year, right? Now, here's the problem with that. If you make, let's say, $126,000 a year, you are automatically disqualified from that $10,000 relief, or if you had the Pell Grants, that $20,000 relief of your student loans. Now, why is that a problem? Just because you're making $126,000 a year doesn't mean you don't have a lot of student debt. You see, $126,000 a year isn't much in New York City. It isn't much in San Francisco. It may be a lot in places like South Carolina. But let's say you're making that $126,000 a year, but let's say you have a lot of student debt. And the reason why you have a lot of student debt is because you went to law school. See, this is where a lot of us incur more of that student debt, not so much in undergrad, but more so in grad school, whether it's to get a master's degree or whether it's to get a Juris Doctorate to become a lawyer or PhD. Now, usually, depending on which school you go to, you can get some type of a fellowship for a PhD. So they're actually paying you a stipend and you don't have to pay for the program, but you still got to find a place to live and all that jazz. So let's say you have law school debt and you're making $126,000 a year and you did not qualify for that student debt relief. You are a part of that 98% that Professor Wolff is talking about. This is why we said don't means test it and just cancel it for everybody. Let's continue.
Money which many of them do not have. Money which will eat into what they can do with rent or with food or with, you see the picture. It's an extraordinary thing to do. But I want to stress again, the hype of the media presenting this as some kind of important act. It's a horrible, bad joke on the problem of debt in this society. Not just student debt, but the debts everybody else has. Mortgage debt for your home, car payment debt for your automobile, and your credit card debt. These are all enormous overhangs of debt that have been taken on by people who don't earn enough money in their paycheck so that they wouldn't have to borrow.
Let's pause there because I want you to understand the root issue. The root issue is not the fact that people have the debt. The root issue is the fact that people don't make enough. They don't earn enough so that they don't have to borrow. Think about that. If you made enough money, if you had a living wage, if you had a higher salary, you would be able to do some of these things and not have to actually take out a student loan, put a bill on your credit card, have a payment plan for medical bills. Because some people that have debt in this country don't have student loan debt, don't have credit card debt, they have medical debt. So part of it is the living wage issue. But the other part of it is the fact that we don't have these free programs in this country like some other countries do. Now, the U.S. government is funding Israel. They have free health care, but we don't. Everyone there has health care, but we don't. We don't have free public universities in this country. Now, at one point in time, the University of California school system used to be free. Did you know that? Used to be free. That's actually a good school system, public school. That includes UCal Berkeley is in that list too, by the way. So hold on to that. We're going to come back to you, Professor Wolff. We're going to come back because he's going to connect this to the French Revolution. But I want you to see something because this proves what I've been saying for a long time. Student loan defaults and delinquency statistics. Now, this was as of March 28th, 2023. Watch this. Let's just go straight to the data. Top student loan default and delinquency statistics. This is a big one right here. 7%. I wish I could make this larger. Oh, there we go. 7% of all borrowers are in default. That is around 3 million people. 3 million people. That means that 3 million people in this country cannot pay or did not pay their student loans. It doesn't take much for you to go into default, by the way. 3 million people in this country. So hold on to that. After entering repayment post-graduation, 11% of borrowers default within the first year, meaning over 1 million borrowers default each year. Now, when you graduate, you have a grace period. When I graduated from undergrad, it was I think it was 6 months grace period. It's supposed to give you enough time to find a job, start making some money, and then you'll be ready to pay your student loans. Here's the problem. That works out as long as you don't have a lot of debt for your student loans. And then number two, you're able to find a job that is going to pay you enough for you to pay your student loans. Some people ran into situations because the economy wasn't great where they weren't able to find employment that would pay them enough to pay off their student loans. Let's go on. Within 5 years of entering repayment, this number jumps to 25%. That means 25% of borrowers within the first 5 years go into default. 25%. At the end of 2022, borrowers had defaulted upon $124.4 billion by the end of 2022. Defaulted upon. Now, let's remember, we had a pause. We had the moratorium on the student loan payments. So like the student loan payments were frozen, started in 2020. It happened under Trump's administration. Started freezing the student loan payments under Trump administration during the pandemic in 2020. Joe Biden won in 2021. It continued. And then 2022 as well, it continued. And it was just this year, this month actually, that it went back into repayment. So if student loans were frozen during that time, which includes 2022, how is it that borrowers had defaulted upon $124.4 billion by the end of 2022? Because what I'm trying to show you is this, that people were already struggling with student loans. People were already struggling. This was before the pandemic. People were already backed up. This is what I want people to understand. This is why a lot of people say, well, you guys had a pause of the student loan payments for all those years. Yeah, but people were already in default. People were already behind. Listen to this. Borrowers are more likely to default on their student loans if they meet any of the following criteria. They attend for-profit colleges. Borrowers who attend for-profit schools are 67% more likely to default on their student loans than borrowers from a 4-year public college. An example, University of Phoenix. Do not go to University of Phoenix. So those for-profit colleges, they tend to give out more loans to students, sometimes more than they actually need. And the students will take it because a lot of times people going to schools like University of Phoenix, it might be a single mom, people who are typically a little bit older, right? So getting that extra money for them to attend school, that helps them out. Also, those colleges are more expensive. They'll charge you like $3,000, $4,000 for one class that a public university may only charge you like $1,500 for that class. So I've said this before, schools like the University of Phoenix are a scam. I've been trying to tell people not to attend those schools. Here's another one. They drop out of college. Students who do not graduate are 3 times more likely to default than those who do. Now, why do people have to drop out of college? I had a family member that had to drop out of college because they had to go back home and take care of their parents because their parents were sick. You still have the student debt. That doesn't go away because you have to drop out of school. That's another one. People coming from lower class communities, you know, it's just them in their family. And so the family looks out for each other. So if someone back home gets sick, you may have to drop out of school and take care of them. These things happen. What's another reason people may drop out of college? Finances. They can't afford it anymore. They have student loans, but it's not enough, and they can't pay for their books. They can't pay for the other expenses that go along with college, or they develop an illness. And I've known people that had to drop out of college because they develop an illness, so they could not attend school. But like I said, regardless of the reason or what happens, the student loan debt does not disappear. And the last reason, they are BIPOC, but particularly Black borrowers. Black students are also 3 times more likely to default on student loans than white students. Now, why is that? The reasons that I just gave you. Who's more likely to drop out of college? Black students. Because of the other reasons I told you, financial reasons, or like I said, sometimes you got to go back home and help out someone in the family. These are things a lot of people don't, if you never had to deal with this, it's like when, for example, when I went to undergrad, I was the first person in my family to graduate from college, right? And that's my extended family too. So I was the first person to do that. What people don't understand is like, when I went to college, undergrad, like I didn't go to school by myself. Like everybody else back home was counting on me. But at the same time, it's like things that happen back home, you're not pulled away from. It's your family. So you still have to deal with those things. And so it's kind of like you taking everybody with you, even though they're not physically there with you. And that's what, it's one of those things kind of hard to explain, but some of you in the chat might understand where I'm coming from. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's like, you're just like, I met people when I was in undergrad, like they just didn't really care. They're like, if I pass, it's no big deal. If I don't pass, no big deal, because I can just go back home and work with my dad's company. Like those are the kind of people I went to college with. I couldn't make that mistake. I think that's what people don't understand. Like I didn't have no company to go back and work with. So there's a lot more riding on you. And then the other reason, these for-profit universities like University of Phoenix, a lot of times have more African-American students that will attend those schools. So this is a big thing people need to start paying attention to. And I said before, instead of, high schools focusing on getting African-American students into college, there needs to be a follow-up to that. And that is making sure that African-American students graduate. That piece I felt was missing, because it's one thing to get your foot in the door, but it's another thing if you don't finish. So that's something that I wish would have been changed back then. In 2022, the student loan default rate was 2.3%. In 2012, this rate was 11.8%, but it has dropped hugely due to the student loan repayment pause. So keep this in mind, guys. The only reason it dropped to 2.3% is because the payments were on pause. 78% of students make at least one late payment within the first 5 years of entering repayment. Within 1 year of entering repayment, this number is 40.9%. Some borrowers go in and out of delinquency on multiple occasions. 6.4% of borrowers have done so 5 or more times. Those who have made late payments are often late on multiple payments. 44.7% of students who have made late payments have only done this on one occasion. 32.5% of students who have made late payments have made 2 or 3 late payments. And 15.6% of students who have made late payments have made 5 or more late payments. Now we're going to go back to Professor Wolff, because the reason why I wanted to dive into this, if this country does not get a handle on the student loan debt, the economy is going to fail. And I don't think the economy is going to be able to recover, because we have to realize something here. If these kids can't pay back their student loans, they're not going to be able to buy anything of value that's going to help the economy. For example, they're not going to be able to put a down payment on a home. Number one, they're going to check your credit. So if you defaulted on your student loans, that fucks up your credit. I'm just keeping it real. So that's going to affect the housing market. These kids aren't buying cars. We talked about this a couple days ago. So that's going to affect retail. So people ask me, what are they spending their money on? A lot of the younger kids are spending their money on experiences. When I was in undergrad and I graduated from undergrad, we spent our money on items, actual possessions that you could put in your hand or something. Kids today, they are spending their money more on experiences. And this is why I say Gen Z generation, they are more likely to be well-traveled. They would rather pool their money together as a group of friends and take a trip to another country, go backpacking through Europe. They would rather spend a little bit of money they have doing something like that than actually trying to get a brand new car. They're living in tiny shoebox apartments. We've talked about this before too. So what I'm saying, guys, if this country doesn't find a way to fix the student debt crisis, eventually this is going to affect the housing market even more, because who's going to be buying homes? All the boomers, the older peeps, they already got their homes. So who's going to continue to buy in the housing market other than BlackRock? Who's going to be buying these homes? Let's get back into the video, and he's going to relate this to the French Revolution. Listen to this.
I want to turn next to Bastille Day, July 14th every year, when the French nation celebrates its revolution. And to do that, it might be useful for me very briefly to go over what that revolution was all about. Back in 1789, right after the American Revolution, the French rose up. They had been suffering for a good century before that. And you know what they suffered? Something that ought to give us pause. They suffered the decline of the standard of living of the French people. Bad harvests, price increases, serious breakdown of their feudal economic system. And at the same time that the mass of the French people were suffering, they were able to watch the super rich, the 0.5% at the top. Louis the 14th, Louis the 50th, they like that numbers game. And those who had money could go to the home of the Louis on the outskirts of Paris, called the Chateau at Versailles, where they could see spectacular acres of carefully maintained gardens and walkways. Yeah, the super rich, the Elon Musks and Jeff Bezoses of that time. And at the end of a century, it exploded in a violent revolution that ended feudalism in France and brought in capitalism. That's right. The transition from pre-capitalism to capitalism was bloody and violent, as these kinds of things are, in large part because you squeezed the mass of people beyond what they could endure, while showing them that the vast wealth of the country was humoring a tiny group of people who had nothing better to do than to build the Chateau of Versailles. Okay.
So the point that he wants to make when he's connecting like the American debt to the French Revolution is that the French people, they got tired of this. They were tired of being exploited. They were tired of having, limited resources. So what did they decide to do? They rose up. The French Revolution wasn't a peaceful protest. I'm sorry. It was not a peaceful protest. It was violent. It was bloody, just like Richard Wolff just said. And what do you see happen with France today, with French people today? President Macron says, don't come out and protest. The French people say, whatever, Macron, we're hitting the streets. They do it anyway. What I'm saying is that came from the French Revolution. And so the French people still have that. They still have that in their gut, that we know that there's more of us than there are of the police, and then there are of, President Macron. There's more of us, the people, the working class people. So I think what Professor Wolff is trying to say there, without necessarily actually saying it, is that when you think about the debt crisis that people have in this country, and yes, we do protest. People do protest in this country for other issues. It's usually social issues, though. I'm still waiting for the protest in this country over economic issues. I'm still waiting for people to hit the streets in this country and complain and chant, let's get rid of the billionaires. Now, Occupy Wall Street was an example where I felt like that was actually a good idea. I felt like it had the right message. But I think about the masses of people that we do have out in the streets for the Palestinian people, for their struggle. Imagine if we had that same level of people out in the street, that same level of energy in reference to inflation, medical debt, student loan debt, and overall cost of living in this country altogether. Imagine if we took Occupy Wall Street and we made it 10 times larger than what it was. Are we ready for that? Something to think about. Something to think about. Let me go to some of the comments in the chat. Thank you for the super chat, AP. Don't forget those trash Parent Plus loans, especially since the government got rid of the Perkins loans. Now parents are in debt with their kids. Yes, sir. This is true. I know those were ridiculous, a pain. Bill Bradley says no one's buying homes. Everyone will be renters. That was the goal. And you notice how they continue to make these shoebox apartments. Like every time you turn around, there's another condo building. They all look the same. They're tall, these little square boxes they think everyone wants to live in a box, basically. They stopped building single family homes, at least here in Massachusetts. They stopped building that and they started focusing on, let's just put everybody in a shoebox. Something to think about. And Mizzou, Sabs, what movies did you watch on Sunday? Sunday, I was at the protest, Sunday evening. So I'm not actually watching movies. At least I haven't been this week. I did watch The Haunting of Hill House. So I did watch that. I finally watched that series. I hadn't seen it. I know some of you are probably like, you never saw that? I finally saw it. I'm now watching The Haunting at Bly Manor. And then I'm assuming I'll go to Midnight Mass next, but not an actual movie on Sunday evening. Thank you for that. All right. Speaking of economics, and we're going to venture into capitalism a little bit here. There's this saying that if you can't beat them, join them. But there's also this idea, that you don't actually have to join them. And that's what Ice Cube decided to do. So Ice Cube decided that he didn't really want to work within the professional athletic organizations that already exist in this country. So he didn't want to work with the NBA. So Ice Cube decided to create his own organization called the Big Three. So he started his own basketball league. It's actually pretty cool if you think about it, right? From what I understand, there are less games, so it's less strenuous on some of the athletes. So some of these guys that may have at one point played for the NBA, but maybe they had to end their career kind of early, they may try to want to be a part of the Big Three, right? Like I said, it's not as many games as the NBA has. Well, apparently, sometimes when you don't want to join them, your competitor doesn't want you to compete with them. And that is essentially what is happening to Ice Cube right now. Apparently, the National Basketball Association, the NBA, is not happy about the fact that Ice Cube started his own basketball league. And apparently, from what I understand about the Big Three, it seems to be getting a little bit popular. Here's a quick little explanation here about the Big Three. Check this out.
Did you know that Ice Cube's Big Three basketball league already has more viewers than the NHL and MLS? Back in 2016, after watching Kobe score 60 points in his final NBA game, Ice Cube and his business partner Jeff Quatnitz were inspired to start their own basketball league. Many NBA legends retired because of the wear and tear of an 82-game season. So they thought, how can we find a way for the world to still watch these basketball greats play? Fast forward a year later and the Big Three was formed. It's a unique 3v3 basketball league, and unlike the NBA, it actually allows for physicality and trash talk.
So let me pause here. Some people like it because of this, because it allows for the players to be a little bit more physical, but also they can talk trash. So you're not going to get a technical foul because you called someone a jerk or an asshole or something like that, for those who don't know. So the thing I thought that was important here too was the demand that comes from the NBA. Like if you're in a professional, if you're part of the NBA, like you play a lot of games throughout the year. Now, I know basketball isn't as physical as football, obviously, but it's still wear and tear on your knees. When you're jumping and shooting the basketball like that, eventually that will wear your knees down. So there is still some physical aspect to the game.
The first team to 50 points wins, so that means each game has a winning shot. And they have a 4-point shot 30 feet from the basket. Every year, at least 5 new sports leagues fail. It's reported that in 2023, the XFL lost $60 million. But last summer, in only the Big Three's 5th season, the games averaged 515,000 viewers on TV, and the championship had over 1 million people watching, which is much higher than we've seen from the NHL and MLS in nationally broadcasted games. Season number 6 of the Big Three starts this Sunday in Chicago, with games being televised on CBS. And every weekend this summer, the Big Three will be traveling to a different city, with the championship being on August 26th, right before the NFL season starts. Some players to watch this season include Nick Young, Joe Johnston, Gerald Green, Leandro Barbosa, and Mario Chalmers. And I'm excited for Isaiah Briscoe, the former #1 point guard from the class of 2015, who's going to try to lead Trilogy to their 3rd consecutive title.
So that's the Big Three in a nutshell. Again, I like these leagues that kind of let you get away with a little bit more than, like the NBA or the NFL. So, of course, even the Big Three has its own website. There's different teams here. You can see, like, again, it's just like similar to the NBA in the sense that they have different teams and they play against each other. But again, less games. But it's getting a lot of attention. The Big Three even has their own YouTube channel. So some of you are probably wondering, okay, what's the problem? The problem is it turns out the NBA is not too happy with Ice Cube having his own league. And apparently they have actually violated antitrust laws. I can't make this one up. Listen to this. So the U.S. Department of Justice launches an official NBA investigation for antitrust violations against Ice Cube's Big Three League. Dun, dun, dun. An investigation into the NBA is underway after the organization allegedly targeted Ice Cube's Big Three League through antitrust violations. According to TMZ Sports, the United States Department of Justice has launched an inquiry into the National Basketball Association after it reportedly exhibited anti-competitive behavior to eliminate the Big Three's growth as an entity of its own. Now let's talk about capitalism. Here's the problem about the second part: making that decision to not join them and start your own. People don't like it when you don't join them, but they definitely don't like it when you start your own, because now you are competition. You're a competitor. It is very difficult to compete with a business that has been around for decades and is large and makes a lot of money and dominates the media, right? It's very difficult to do that. I would use the comparison Walmart and Amazon. You can open a mom and pop shop that sells the same things that Walmart and Amazon sells, but it is very difficult to compete with those two entities because they are huge. There's a lot of money behind them. They've been around for a long time. So this is why other businesses, smaller businesses, have had to close because of companies like Amazon, because of companies like Walmart. You have like Whole Foods who sold to Amazon and said, go ahead, we'll just go ahead and take it, just go ahead. And that's what happens. Some of these other companies will just go ahead and give in because they can't compete. Problem is with this particular situation is that Ice Cube's Big Three is actually competitive. It's actually doing well. And the NBA does not like that. It is now in its 6th season. So the thing is, if the Big Three failed, or if the Big Three wasn't getting as much attention, I don't think the NBA would care. But the Big Three is doing well, and it is getting a lot of attention. And that to the NBA is a problem. So when people tell me that they're for free market and fair competition, I always push back with the competition isn't fair. Look at what the NBA is doing to the Big Three, violating antitrust laws. Let's go on. The claims. The allegations include reports that the NBA supposedly used its status to prevent sponsors and potential partners from doing business with the league. So they tried to block other sponsors and partners from working with them. So the league was started by Ice Cube and his business partner, Jeff Quintinez. I think that's how you pronounce the last name, Quintinez. The NBA also reportedly attempted to deter television networks from broadcasting the new league's games. So here's the thing. You started this basketball league. Obviously, people do like to watch sports on television, not just in person. But if the NBA is working with, behind the scenes, other television networks and telling them, don't play games from the Big Three league, that's not fair competition. For my capitalist friends out there, those of you who continue to tell me you believe in a free market, you believe in fair competition, the competition ain't fair, boo. That's what I've been trying to tell you. Look at what they're doing behind the scenes. Cube's Big Three was launched in 2017 and consisted of nearly all retired NBA players. So you see, this was a home for those players who retired from the NBA and they didn't have, their body couldn't take the wear and tear of playing all those games anymore, right? What's more, current NBA players have reportedly expressed a desire to play in the 3-on-3 league. See, I told you, here comes the competition. Current NBA players have reportedly expressed a desire to play in the Big Three. And the NBA does not like this. See, this is why I say, so they're going to try to do whatever they can to stop people from going to the Big Three or to limit the Big Three's visibility. The NBA has been doing that. The competition isn't fair. It goes on to say, however, according to the Big Three, the professional organization has put arbitrary rules in place to stop players from hooping with the league. The outlet points out that the NBA and the Big Three don't have seasons that overlap, and it isn't uncommon for current NBA players, including stars such as LeBron James, to play in non-NBA games once their season has concluded. For example, the Los Angeles Drew League is frequented by NBA players well after the regular season. As previously reported by Afrotech, this is not the first time that Ice Cube has accused the NBA of attempting to thwart his plans with the Big Three. Now on to the investigation. In addition to targeting players, it has also been reported that the NBA owners have been discouraged from investing in the Big Three while they own an NBA franchise. At this time, NBA spokesperson Mike Bass told TMZ, those claims are not true. We have been supportive of the Big Three since its inception, but we declined to invest. I mean, of course, he's not going to admit that it is true, right? According to a source familiar with the DOJ, Ice Cube and Quintanez reportedly met with DOJ lawyers earlier this year. The NBA owners are said to have officially received contact from investigators on the case as well. Should it be proven that the league did commit antitrust violations, reports reveal that the NBA could receive a significant fine. I would say define significant because the NBA has a lot of money. So what's significant to them may be different from what's significant to us, right? Now, there's more. So I want to play this video here. It says Ice Cube was right all along. The NBA was trying to target his big three basketball games. Oops. There we go. Listen to this.
Okay, we got to talk about Ice Cube and his big 3-on-3 tournament. Because what the NBA is doing to him, he might be able to settle for a lot of money, and that includes because of what the Justice Department had launched. Now, according to TMZ, the United States Department of Justice is investigating the NBA over alleged antitrust violations targeting Big Three. Now, according to the Justice Department, they believe that the NBA had been trying to torpedo Ice Cube's Big Three basketball league, and we have to get into all of these details. Now, TMZ Sports has learned that the DOJ launched the inquiry a couple of months ago, and they're examining alleged anti-competition behavior on part of the NBA amid them trying to squash the Big Three's growth. Essentially, the NBA is being accused of trying to destroy the Big Three tournament because retired NBA players, after they leave the NBA, were headed over to the Big Three to play. Now, according to the Justice Department, the NBA had purportedly been throwing its weight around to prevent sponsors and other potential partners from doing business with Ice Cube's league. And also, they were trying to discourage television networks from carrying the Big Three games. That is insane. That is very anti-competition and breaking antitrust laws, because there's no law that states there can't be another National Basketball League or National Basketball Association.
No, there isn't a law that says there can't be another National Basketball League. So to me, it kind of sounds like the NBA is trying to be a monopoly.
And the Big Three falls under one of those categories. And if it's a little confusing for you, think Netflix and Blockbuster. Now, current NBA players who are ready for retirement had expressed their desire to play for Ice Cube's league, including individual NBA players during the off season. But they were told, as the Big Three sees it, the NBA has prevented guys from doing so and putting arbitrary rules in place to stop players from hooping in Ice Cube's league. FYI, the NBA and Big Three seasons don't even overlap. Now, if the federal government does find that the NBA had violated antitrust laws, the NBA could see a significant fine, which means a big payout for Ice Cube and his league. It's crazy the lengths that these large businesses will go to squash people and small businesses. This is technically a small business, but you see the length that they would go just to stop former basketball players and current basketball players for just playing outside of the NBA.
See how this works, guys? Now, I want to remind you, Ice Cube is not one of those people that is a part of the club. I want to take you back to a time when Ice Cube tried to tell us that he's not a part of the club. So just keep that in mind. He is going to be a target. Listen to this.
Some of you may not have realized that I'm not part of the club. And a lot of you listening to me right here, right now, you're not part of the club either. And what I realized with the club is what makes them so mad is when you don't want to be a part of their fucking club. That pisses them off.
Remember what I was telling you? If you can't beat them, join them. And if you don't want to join them, you don't have to. But how dare you start your own?
What club am I talking about? I'm talking about the club of gatekeepers that we all got to deal with. You know who they are, and they definitely know who they are. A lot of people would be like, what? Who? Come on, man, stop playing. So, ever since ever since I put out the contract with Black America, they've been fucking with me. Here and there, this and that. But it's cool, I expect that. I've been working with, on the big three for a long time. And you know how they've been fucking with me with that. I done made it, plain, simple, and clear what they've been doing. The NBA been fucking with us. Now, a lot of people might say, like, well, but Cube, you want to work with the NBA. Really, I don't give a fuck about working with the NBA. What I want them to do, when I say work with us, is to stop working against us. Stop doing that bullshit behind the scenes that we know you're doing.
So remember, this was already a heads up when he says stop doing that behind the scenes that you know that you're doing. What was the NBA doing? They were trying to prevent other networks from showing big three games.
Mainstream media, they ain't fucking with us. And that's cool. We can do it ourselves. You know what I'm saying? We still on the rise without these motherfuckers. So we don't need them. You don't need them. So what am I going to do to deal with these motherfucking gatekeepers? Well, what I'm going to do is go on a Fuck the Gatekeepers podcast tour.
Okay. And then he goes on there talking about how he wants to do a podcast tour, and he has gone on to different podcasts as well. But that's the thing, guys. This is what I've been trying to tell people. Like, I get it. Some people like having like free market. Some people feel like, they want to have like that control and to be able to make as much money as they want to and that type of thing. But what people have to understand is that the system itself is not fair. As some people make it, some people don't. People don't become billionaires without exploiting someone along the way. That's how that happens. But the thing is, it's not, the competition itself is not fair. It's not fair for everybody. People do, stuff like that to you behind your back and try to make it so that your business will not be successful, or how dare you try to compete with them in any way, shape, or form. And that's the thing. It's just not fair. So people tell me, what fair competition? I'm like, there is no fair competition. It's not. It's none. But that is crazy, and it's wild. It's unfortunate, but I hope more people talk about that story, because again, not just whether you like basketball or not, or if you're a fan of Ice Cube, I hope people talk about that story, because we need to talk about how some of these businesses, and the NBA is a business. We need to talk about how some of these businesses do dirty-handed things like this and make it unfair for other people who are just trying to do their own thing. Something we got to talk about. We'll talk about it one day. I need to have one more story, big news for New York. I want to go ahead and remind everybody, if you didn't have the chance to do so, to go ahead and hit that like button for me, guys. That helps me out with the algorithm. And I want to go ahead and shout out Rockfin. If you guys haven't been able to tell, I'm by myself tonight. There is no Eric's on vacay. Well, actually, not really vacay. Eric has plans. So Eric's hanging out, doing his thing. But I do just want to go ahead and shout. Whoops, sorry. I turn it down on Rockfin. I do want to go ahead and shout out the tips on Rockfin. Thank you for the tip, Daniel Pines. Norm Finkelstein compared the Nat Turner slave revolt to the attacks by the Gaza militants. He does this on Chris Hedges' show on the Real News Network and on Useful Idiots. He also draws on the writings of the abolitionists in response to Nat Turner's slave revolt. Yes, he does. That's another thing I've been saying too, is that some of these people who, are trying to shame like the Palestinian people, some of these people would have been against that, against the Haitian slave revolt as well. Thank you for the tip, Dave. Got to give big praise to Sabs for hosting these kinds of discussions. Thank you, Dave. And thank you for the tip, Roger. 12 trillion mortgage debt 1.8 trillion student loan debt, 1.5 trillion auto loan debt, and 200 billion medical debt. No power in the workplace, a joke of a minimum wage, choking out a politician in the boss class, priceless. People, tell your kids, younger siblings, and grandkids, study abroad for free. This will accomplish two things: depletion of bodies for the U.S., for the military emptying their war machine, and the U.S. colleges and universities. Yeah, thank you so much for that, Roger. Again, I like to remind people you can always study abroad for free. For free. Bill says Ice Cube was always talented. He wrote most of the lyrics on the first NWA album for the entire group. All right, all right. All right, the last story here, this is a shorter story, but it appears, and thank you, Roger, for bringing this to my attention. It appears that the state of New York actually has a bill that could possibly make New York State a ballot initiative state, which is direct democracy, putting the hands, or actually putting the votes right in the hands of the people. So you would, like my state, Massachusetts, is a ballot initiative state. So when I go to vote, I am voting for those ballot measure questions that are on my ballot. So that's actual direct democracy. What a lot of people who do not live in a ballot initiative state, they don't get the opportunity to do that. They only get the opportunity to vote for a representative and hope that representative will vote for the things that you want them to. And I think we've seen how that's going. So this is huge. If New York State becomes a ballot initiative state, that would put pressure on other states around New York. So this is a big deal. And I think New Yorkers would really like this. I'm not going to read the entire bill, obviously, but I do want to read this top part. This is the bill. It says, Section 1, notwithstanding any other provision of this Constitution, the people reserve to themselves the power to propose laws and to propose amendments to the Constitution, and to adopt or reject the same at the polls, independent of the legislature, and also reserve the power at their own option to so adopt or reject any act or section or part of any act passed by the legislator. 2, as used in this article, initiative is the power of the electors to propose amendments to the Constitution and to propose statutes. B, referendum is the power of the electors to approve or reject statutes or parts of statute. 3, initiative may be used for any measure embracing a single object or purpose, except the following: calling elections, appropriating funds, except for an initiative proposing an appropriation for a single object or purpose, naming an individual to hold any office, naming or identifying any private corporation or other private entity to perform any function or to have any power or duty. Such measures may not be submitted to the electors and shall not have the force and effect of the law. So guys, essentially, if New York State becomes a ballot initiative state, this could be huge. This could be huge. This could help you get some of those local wins, you know, that we've talked about here in Massachusetts, just putting the power in the hands of the people. Now, a couple of things I do want to highlight here. It calls for a single subject and subject restriction rules regarding competitive initiative. It says if provisions of 2 or more measures approved at the same election conflict, those of the measure receiving the highest number of affirmative votes shall prevail. Something Roger added here, this right here needs to be corrected to say the following: in the event of competing state constitutional amendment initiatives conflicting with each other, then the measure with the most yes votes will be ratified into the state constitution. In the event of competing state statute initiatives conflict with each other, then the measure with the most yes votes will become law. However, in the event of competing amendment initiative and state statute initiatives conflicting with each other, and they both are approved, then the amendment will take precedent over the state statute, regardless of how many votes each one got. So, and then there's a couple other things that Roger adds here. Like I said, I don't have time to read the whole thing, but I can share this with you guys because there were more suggestions that Roger made. And then I want to bring up Kathy Hochul. Now, some of you wondering, why was she on the thumbnail? Because Kathy Hochul is the governor of New York. The governor signs bills into law. So I want to take you back to this year, 2023, September. Listen to this. It says, Governor Kathy Hochul signed legislation approved earlier this year that she says expands and strengthens the basic right to vote. Our laws are going to modernize and improve every step of the process, from registering to casting your ballot to the Electoral College, Hochul said. The governor signed 10 laws in total Wednesday at New York Law School. The laws build on New York's John Lewis Voting Rights Act signed last year. Among those signed is a law that expands early voting by mail. So again, just to remind you guys, at least in my state, every state's different with ballot initiatives, but at least in my state, when we vote for these ballot measures, at the end of the day, the governor signs these into law. They sign the bills. So here's what I would recommend for those of you who live in a state that is not a ballot initiative state. I would highly recommend that you contact your governor and tell them about what is happening in New York State and push them to put a bill forward. You ask your representatives as well, not just the governor, but to put a bill forward in your state house to allow your state to become a ballot initiative state. And you can use New York as an example. These things aren't set in stone. I give you the ballot initiative states, but that doesn't mean it can't change. Other states can also become a BI state as well. So that's just something to think about. So if you live in a state that's not a ballot initiative state, I highly recommend contact your representatives and ask them to put a bill forward in the House to allow your state to become a BI state. That's it. That's it. All right, guys, I told you I didn't want to keep you too long because the World Series is on. So I do want to go ahead and skedoodle on out of here. But I hope you've had a good night, guys. I hope you have. And, I'm not here on Saturdays, so I'll be live again next time, this Sunday, 5 p.m. Eastern time. I want to make sure I got everything. Thank you for the super chat, Aaron. I love you, Sabby, and love the diversity of your issues, from women's rights with Brittany, our comrade, to sports when it involves corruption. Oh, thank you, Aaron. Thank you. Thank you. All right, guys. Thank you so much for your time. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.